Communication with friends. I had to look it up in the dictionary. I think I know what a friend is, and yet sometimes I know that I say, these are my fellow friends, friends that I just have met them. And it's just a group that we happen to be together, and they're friends, and that we have the same cause. Other times, a friend is just someone that I'm acquainted with, but not on intimate terms. And then sometimes a friend is a very close personal friend. I've had only a few of them in my lifetime, but I have had several. And I don't think many people ever have more in the personal, close, intimate friends, more than maybe 3 or 4 in a lifetime, because it takes a lot to be a close personal friend. But friend, I looked it up in the dictionary and thought, well, it's about what I thought. First of all, it said one who is personally well known by oneself and for whom one has warm regard or affection. Intimate. 2, one with whom one is on speaking terms, an associate or acquaintance, and we say, yes, they're my friends, and it's in a more general sense. 3, one who belongs to the same nation. You know, my fellow friends, my fellow Americans, my fellow Republicans, my fellow Democrats, my fellow Baptists, my fellow, on that, and we are friends. One who belongs to the same nation, party, as oneself, also one with whom one is united in some purpose or cause. Or 4, a patron or supporter, a friend of the arts, for instance, is someone who maybe gives a lot of money to the cause of music, the cause of painting, art, that type of art. And so there are many different types of friends. How do you communicate with friends? When we talk about communication with friends, then we will be dealing with all types of friends. First of all, we want to let friends know that we've thought of them. And if you'll listen to a president or a political candidate, when they get up to talk to their fellow countrymen, my friends, they let you know they've thought of you. They talk about your interests. They use, we call it propaganda, but they have really spent some time, or people for them have spent time researching your interests. So in that sense, they're communicating with their friends. A president communicates with his friends when he gets up on the TV, to speak over TV. He talks to his fellow Americans, many of whom have voted for him, and therefore they've been his friend in that way. So he shows that he's interested in them, that he cares for them. Surely we who have close personal friends, or in a more general sense, many, many friends, want to let folks know that we've thought of them. There are many, many ways that we can communicate and let people know that we've thought of them. We need to listen to people. We need to listen to what people say about other people, unless it's gossip. But when we can pick up on a need, when we can pick up on someone's wishes, when we can pick up on someone's interests and later give a gift, send an article to them, send a poem to them you found that you think will show them that you've been thinking of them, that's one of the highest compliments that you can give. Let them know you've listened. A lot of people, when giving gifts, go out and buy things they like to give away. For instance, if I liked, and I do, if I like some expensive perfume, I might think that would be the gift to give my friend, when I might not have listened closely enough to find out that my friend is even allergic to any scent and never wears any kind of perfume. And there she is, straddled with a bottle of perfume because I liked it. That is not really communicating with a friend. Surely, if politicians can communicate with their friends by spending some time researching them, we can listen and find out what our friends would like. 1 Peter 3:8 says, "Finally, be ye all of one mind, having compassion one another, love as brethren, be pitiful, be courteous." We can communicate with a friend by saying, "Won't you go first? Wouldn't you like to have this? I'd like to give this to you." This is communication with a friend. 1 Peter 2:17 says, honor all men. Oh, we're communicating with our friend when we build them, when we give honor. Recently, I said about a girl at school, I was talking with my husband, I said about this girl, I said she's a natural builder. I said she's not flattery. It's not flattery. If she's not sincere, I don't detect an insincere bone in her body. She's the kind of person who just knows what to say, when to say it. It comes out right, and she builds everyone with whom she comes in contact. She was talking to a single lady who is a staff member here at our college, and you know what most people say to single ladies who are not 21 anymore, a little bit older than that. They say, when are you going to get married? Aren't you ever going to get married? Or they say, what is a pretty girl like you? Why is a pretty girl like you not married? Well, what are you going to say to that? You know, usually they say, well, there just hasn't been anybody good enough for me yet, or some dumb thing that they have to say in order to just cope with such questions. Instead, this girl came up to the single lady and said, whoever gets you is really going to be a fortunate person. Wow. She communicated. She truly built this single lady, instead of making her feel like a klutz for not being married, when possibly she just had not found the one. God had not sent the person that was for her yet. She didn't push her into an immature or premature marriage for which she would have been sorry, just by making her feel klutzy, questioning her, and almost attacking her for not being married. Instead, she turned it and made it so beautiful. If someone ever gets you, are they ever going to be fortunate? She was a builder. She was communicating with a friend. This girl at the school was a friend to this staff member. They're not friends as peers are friends, but she surely performed the duty of a friend when she said this to this staff member. This same girl, she's a student at our school. Maybe some of you'll know her. Her name's Barbara Williams. She's one of our black students. And one of the finest I've known. She's one of our finest girls. If someone comes into her room in the dormitory and downgrades themselves, sells themselves short, you know how people say, well, I'm not this, and I can't do that. She won't allow it. She just won't allow it. That's all there is to it. Stop it. She'll stop them. No, you're not like that. It just insults her. She starts a building campaign right then and tells them who they are and what they are. She's communicating with friends. Honor all men. Honor all men doesn't mean that you have to communicate by throwing a big party for them in their honor. It doesn't mean you have to throw up balloons and wave flags. And it doesn't mean you have to get a plaque and write some good writing on it to honor them. You honor them when you're all alone with them and you tell them something good someone said about them. You're communicating good to them. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Honor the king. Honor all men. 1 Peter 2:17. Be a builder. You say, well, I don't know. When I say those things, they come out so weak. They sound as if I'm flattering. They sound unnatural to me. Well, of course they're going to sound unnatural if you've not been used to doing it. Start a little book. Get you an idea book. Now listen, will you? Will you really listen to me? Will you get an idea book? Just a little old, I don't care, one of those 49-cent Peanuts books that has a cute little old picture on the front of it if you want to. I don't care. Something you can carry in your purse. And every time you hear someone say something good about somebody, write it down. You won't remember it. We can remember good said about us, and we pull it out like a little pearl and look at it and examine it, go to bed with it, and it makes us feel so good, and that's fine. We need those little pearls that are thrown our way once in a while. But also make it a hobby of yours to collect pearls for others. It'll do more for them than if you could go buy cultivated, beautiful jewelry, pearls for them. Put pearls around people's neck. Put pearls on your friends' ears, if they're girls. Put pearls around in their hair. Throw pearls, throw rubies, throw diamonds, throw emeralds. You have it within your power. If you'll get your little book, put it in your purse, carry it with you, and every time you hear something good, mark it down on another page. Write it down right then. And every page will be a note. All you have to say in a couple, after every few weeks, take some time and put at the top of the first page, put, Mrs. Jones said this about you, colon. And then it'll be a quote, what you wrote down. Then fold the little paper when you tear it out of the little notebook and put the person's name on the opposite side. And hand it to them one day. You'll feel so good. And you'll be communicating with a friend. And they'll feel so good, too. And it'll cure all that molly-grubby stuff that you sit around and talk about. Now, if you want to, you can keep another little notebook. Or you can start from the back and work forward and see how many pages you can get through and how fast you have to buy another notebook. It's money well worth spending. Now, on this little notebook, or on the second half, however you do it, of your little notebook, every time someone does something good that you like and you see, write it down. If you think it, if it crosses your mind, write it down. It's too late to think of, sometimes you'll see them, you'll say, I was thinking about something about you, but I can't remember now. And you'll lose the emphasis of how well you felt about that thing you saw done. Write it down. One day recently I heard a faculty member going past my office door, and this faculty member Jack Rose, was telling Mr. Barton, who does the flowers on our campus, he says, I've sure enjoyed the flowers this summer. I loved hearing that. I eavesdropped. I heard it. And I told Mr. Rose, I loved hearing what I overheard you say to Mr. Barton, that a man on our faculty got out of his books and got out of his work, which he has so much work, looked at flowers, thought, where did they come from? How much time did it take that person to do them? I'm going to let him know. And so I let Mr. Rose know that I liked more than the flowers. I liked the fact that Mr. Rose recognized the flowers. Oh, it'd be fun to live in a world where people spent their time filling up notebooks like this. If I hadn't seen Mr. Rose, I would have liked to have pulled that little paper out, put Mr. Rose on the outside, and on the one side it would have said, I was glad today when I overheard Mr. Rose saying to Mr. Barton, I like those flowers. You say it sounds silly. Oh, it's not nearly so silly as remembering all the bad things you hear about people and saying, I heard this and I thought you ought to know. It's something that maybe you'll want to know. Oh, no. Let's decide that we're going to find some ways to communicate and that we're going to communicate well. Now, don't communicate all the time with just one or two people. Oh, that can lead to some sadness. You can cause people to depend upon you in such a way that, you see, people have never had this before. So few people give compliments. So few people build another one. That if you build too much on one person, other than your own family, your husband, your children, if you build too much on one person and get them to feeling too good around you, sometimes they're so dependent upon you, they can't go away from you. Let's find lots of people to do this with. Because you're not going to want to make a person dependent on you. You might say, just a minute, Marlene. You hit on something. I believe I have someone up so close to me, and I've done this so much with one person that they are dependent upon me till they have no other friends. Now I'm feeling smothered, worn out of it, and I feel like cutting out and just turning my back on that person I've pulled too close to me. Be careful. Now don't pull out overnight. Maybe you have done wrong. Maybe you didn't realize what you were doing. And maybe you did pull someone. I've known of a pastor's wives. I've done this. I've had this done to me. It hurts. Maybe you've had it done to you. Maybe you've done it. It hurts. It can hurt so badly it can almost destroy a person physically and emotionally. I've seen students get so close to one another. Then I have one right now. The girl was so close to a senior girl who got married. The married girl's off and on a new life. The other girl's come back for her second year at college and is completely lost. She doesn't know anyone else. She's centered her whole life around one other person. It's wonderful to have close friends. You'll always have people that are special to you. But be sure to point them to others, to the Lord and to others, and center your relationship around God, around soul winning, around caring about others, and going toward others. Now, if you've done this already, pulled someone too close. Maybe you're a pastor's wife and you're going to have to leave now. And you someone was a help and a blessing to you, and they have no one else now because you kept them right with you all the time, and you felt you were doing right by doing it. You really did. You did it innocently. Now, be careful. Do not start new things, to do new things with this person. But do gradually stop some of the things you have been doing. If you've been with them all the time, constantly, and you know it's eating at you and you're feeling possessed, then gradually talk to the person a little bit and say, maybe we ought not to be together quite as much, and maybe let's just not this one thing. And if you've been used to calling every day or maybe several times a day, don't call quite so much, but don't cut them off. It's too difficult for a person to be cut off. A lot of people don't know what to do with the situation once they've done it, and once they've gotten somebody up too close to them, and so they just cut them off. Don't do that. Phase the relationship to a gradual one. Never phase it out. It's so wonderful to have ties and communicate with people for the rest of your life. If you've ever had a friend, it's so wonderful when they're your friend still when you go to your grave. Maybe you've moved far away. Maybe you haven't been able to keep up letter writing, but yet at least Christmas you hear from one another. Or maybe you don't even send Christmas cards anymore, but if every 2 or 3 years you find out where that person is, and keeping ties throughout the years is a beautiful thing. Don't ever phase it out, but do phase out a wrong relationship where someone just depends on you and you only for friendship. If you've been sending lots of notes and lots of cards and lots of gifts, don't make them quite as much. Just a little bit. Break it off, and it has to be very gradual. And depending on how long you've been doing it, it has to be very, very gradual. If you spend a year pulling a person up close to you, it's going to take a year probably to get it back to a normal, good, healthy relationship. Remember that a little bit or one time with a person like this, doing something new, does not work with certain people. Certain people cling to you because they've never had relationships with other people. And therefore, you've communicated with them in such a way that you're not able to communicate in a healthy way now. If you give your life in this way to someone and then begin to resent it, it really doesn't help them. It keeps you in constant turmoil, and it really keeps them in constant turmoil because they have to always be finding ways to get with you. And if they can't get with you, they can't be happy. And that's not that. It just won't work. Your only hope to stay by a person like this who is really just with you all the time, if they'll let you, is to ask them and work with them and ask them how you can little by little lessen this relationship to where you can put more emphasis on other people. Maybe at first you and the other person are together, but you pull someone else in with you to go someplace. And then maybe you'll pull another person. And then maybe you'll point the person with you to doing some activity for you that is away from you. Or maybe you'll pull them to go with someone soul winning for you and help them to get to knowing other people. There are one friend people. There are people who want one friend. That's the only friend they want. They don't want anyone else. They feel secure with one person or one family, and even couples who want just one other couple, and that's all they want. It can lead to some dangerous things, and you become so much together that it's something to beware of. It's very possible that you'll need to, if you're in this kind of situation, don't provide the kinds of times that where you just sit together and talk about your relationship and talk about how wonderful each other is. Do activities together. As I said, center yourself on the cause of Christ. One of the sweetest friendships I know about is Eleanor Hawkins, who has gone to be with Jesus now, but I still think the friendship's there and is lasting. And Mrs. Olin Holbrook, Louise Holbrook, who is now 79, and she was my Sunday school teacher many years ago, about 18 years ago, and for many years at Highland Park Baptist Church in Chattanooga. Both were widows, and they'd been friends. When Eleanor died last year, they'd been friends, I think, 50-some years, maybe more. And but they always included other people. They were the closest of friends. They called each other Jonathan and David. One had led the other one to get into the Bible, and one had first gotten truly assurance of salvation and gotten into the Word first. And everyone knew that they were the best friends. But they had so many other good friends, together and separately. And if they, after they became widows, they'd drive to church together. But after they got to church, they might part and go their separate ways and be with their other friends. And then come back to the car and go back to their, and let each other off so they wouldn't have to be alone when they were driving. And I never heard of them having spats and having fusses. I think once Mrs. Holbrook said in all the years, maybe there was a little bit of difficult time, and she said when there was, it was that there had been a death of a father of one of them, and when they realized there was a little problem, they got down on their knees together by the bed and prayed that God would take care of that problem. When they got together, they studied the Bible together, and they'd get on the phone and talk about the Bible and about people in their individual Sunday school classes. They didn't have they had separate Sunday school classes. They had separate friends. They had separate, and then they came together for enjoyment around those individual activities. Don't have one or even two or three friends. You're going to have your special friends. I tell the girls at Hiles-Anderson College, when you come to school, don't room with your friend. You're going to find times to be with your close friend who you're already close friends with. Room with people you don't know. Learn some new personalities and some new temperaments so that you'll be able to come back to your close friend and add to her because you have some other interests that you haven't had together. Oh, we can learn to communicate, and we can do what God wants us to do, and then have these beautiful friendships that he allows us to have on earth. Now, Philippians 2:14 says, do all things without murmurings and disputings. You say, my friend and I have been in some problems, and we've had our quarrels, and I'm so upset. We're cool toward one another now. We've been so close, and now we're not talking. Now, first, let me say, it's very possible that you were too close is the reason you're having your quarrels and now having to act cool. But it might not be that. It's also possible that someone's sick or there's been a tiredness or one of you. Don't stand back and wonder who's right and who's wrong. Both of you, and probably I ought to say, but one of you, don't say, well, I'm always the one to say I'm sorry. Good. Great. Jump in and say, I'm sorry again. Or jump in and say, act like nothing's wrong if that would work in your friendship. Sometimes it doesn't, but if it will work in your friendship, call up and don't even say, it seems like we've been cool. Just call up and say, I'm going over to pick up a bushel of apples. Go with me, will you? It's a beautiful fall day. Let's go over to the orchards and help me pick up a bushel of apples. And the thing may be all over with. We're not to be murmuring and disputing. We're not to be having troubles with one another. We're friends, and Jesus is our friend, and Jesus doesn't cause us trouble. Now, we hurt him, but even then he stays by us. He stays in us if we're born again and know him as our Savior, and he's our pattern for friendship. He says he's our friend. We know he's our friend. He's our closest friend. He sticketh closer than a brother. He's told us how to have friends. He says a friend must prove himself friendly. And then we know that a friend loveth at all times. That means when you can't understand someone else. A friend told me after my mother died, a friend told me, he said, it seemed like you weren't even around for a few weeks. But they stayed around. They didn't leave me because I wasn't there. I was there in body, but I guess I didn't think I felt too terribly bad, but they said it was like you weren't there. The real you wasn't there. And I suppose that happens. How wonderful it is to have a friend that will stay around you when you're not there. You know, somebody you say, well, not all there mentally. No, I mean sometimes you're not all there. Your personality's gone. You're emotionally shot. You're just not yourself. And some people would turn on you when you're like that. But a friend, a real friend, just sticks around and waits. They know you'll come back. They know you'll be there. They know you're preoccupied. They don't say, "What's wrong? What's wrong? Is anything wrong? Have I done something wrong? Or do you still like me? I haven't." They just stay. They just stay. They just stick there. What a wonderful thing to have ties. There are too few ties in this world today. As a kid, I had a friend who was my dentist. There was the only man in town. Dr. Hinman. Everybody went to Dr. Hinman. He was everybody's friend. If you call a man who wants to kill you a friend, but no, he wants to help you after he kills you so you can help that old pain. Everybody had the same doctor, and he was a friend of the family, had been all your life. Everybody had the same 7th grade school teacher. She'd been there for years. So she knew your mom and dad and your brother and your sister, and everybody had the same friend, same types of friends. You went down to the grocery store, went down to the Rexall drugstore. Why, they'd been there. Oh, my, that older lady that ran that, Mrs. Schaefer, Mrs. Hill. Mrs. Hill, she'd been there since I was a little kid. She knew my dad. She knew everybody. Now we're in bigger areas, or we move, or even if we're in small areas, we move, and we don't know people as well, and we choose who we go to. And someone, if you get your hair fixed, a woman gets her hair fixed, she may go to one woman for a permanent one time, and 6 weeks later she goes to another one for a haircut, and she doesn't have a friend for a beauty operator. I like to have the same dentist, the same beauty operator, go to the same restaurant even, and know the waitresses there, and begin to get to be friends. I don't mean I spend a lot of time with them or even go out with them socially, but I feel like they're a certain type of friend in the broad sense of the word friend. Then I can communicate with them. I can find out that, they were sick last week, and maybe let them know that I care by bringing in a little. I found out a waiter one time. I found out he had a birthday. We sent over to that cookie factory and had a happy birthday cookie made and sent over to him because I know him and he knows me. And I wanted him to know I cared, that it was his birthday, so I was communicating something. I let him know that I recognize him. He's not just an object who serves me, but that I wanted to communicate and to reach out in some way and touch his life to let him know that I cared about him. Now, we've talked about how to communicate with friends. We've talked about a danger of being too close to just a few and not having many, many friends. And we've talked about having disputes with your friends. Remember, your greatest friend is the Lord Jesus Christ. He'll make you a good friend if you'll let him. Get into the Word of God so that you can know that great is his faithfulness to us, and therefore great cannot be our faithfulness to our friends. Great peace have they which love thy law, and nothing shall offend them. No friend can become a stumbling block to me or really say anything that offends me if I love the Bible. Love the Bible, and you'll love your friends. And the Bible will show you ways to communicate that fact so that people can feel loved when they're around you. Folks ought to feel special when they've been around you. They ought to feel that they are ready to go out and lick the world because they've been with you. Isn't that how you feel when you've been with Jesus? Human relations is the most important business in the world, I guess. After we're once saved, know Jesus Christ is our Savior. Getting along with people becomes one of the most intricate and one of the most difficult things in all the world. Not getting along with people probably is the reason for the breakup of families, the breakup of churches, the breakup of relations between teachers and students. It's the reason businesses go under, because the workers don't get along. It's a sad thing to realize that if we do not know a little bit, have a little bit of finesse in the field of human relations, we really can't do any work that the Lord would have us to do. Our fellow workers can be a headache and a heartache to us, or they can be a real joy, and they can be help. We, as a fellow worker to someone else, can be a headache or a joy. I can remember starting my work experience way back when I was 11 and 12 years old, taking my bicycle and going out to a truck garden. The name of the man who was in charge of the truck garden was Boo Bowden. I think his first name was Charles. I can't remember for sure, but around town and around Blue Springs, Nebraska, he was Boo. And I think it came from Bowden. I don't know where it came from, but it's always Boo. He was our boss, and he'd come out when we were out picking tomatoes and picking cucumbers and strawberries. And by the way, as kids, we made quite a bit, and that was back during the right after the Second World War. We were out there making 25 cents a 5-gallon can for picking tomatoes and cucumbers, and 25 cents a quart, I believe it was, for picking strawberries. And that's pretty good money. So we were out there picking our strawberries, and I can recall Boo coming out and complaining against some of the girls who were out there picking. He said they come out here with these this no clothes on, and they sunburn, and they're not able to stay. They get sick because they're out in the sun picking it. And I thought, yeah, those dummies. And I thought my fellow workers were pretty discouraging to me. I felt, how stupid. Why don't they shape up and do right? And they were kids, 11, 12, 13 years old. They didn't really want to come out and pick cucumbers and strawberries. They wanted to come out and have a little bit of fun, take home some money, and go get what they wanted. Their real motive wasn't to get in there and really, really work. Right off, on my first little job, I had trouble with my fellow workers. I criticized them. I looked down on them. I thought they were stupid. Those people had trouble keeping their jobs, and they caused everybody else trouble. You know what some of those people would do? They'd go down the long rows of strawberries. The strawberries would be all packed with straw that was to fertilize, take care of them and make them grow better. And they would go down just as fast as they could and take the best strawberries and the ones that were the easiest to pick. And then some of us who would come in later couldn't find any strawberries to pick. Oh, I'll tell you something even worse than that. Ooh, now that I'm getting into it, I'm really getting worked up about this. I'll tell you something worse than that. And, of course, this was terrible. They sometimes put straw in the bottom of their strawberry baskets and then just put a few strawberries at the top and got their quarter for picking that quart of strawberries and didn't even have but about a fourth of a quart of strawberries in there. Then you know what happened, don't you? The strawberries were taken to market up in Beatrice at the county seat, Gage County seat, and people began to complain, bring the baskets back, saying they were 3/4 full of straw, and Boo Bougen couldn't sell his strawberries there any longer. So we, who really picked strawberries, didn't get to have our job as long as we might have had, because he didn't have a market for his strawberries. That's simple. And yet it's the very same thing that happens as you get a little bit older, you become adult, you go into other kinds of work. I doubt that the fights you have with your fellow workers, or the fusses, the arguments, the heartaches, are on any higher level than the ones I just mentioned to you. It's just about the same thing. I went to a dime store when I was 12, 13 years old. Started working in the summer times in a dime store. I don't know how you were able to work in a dime store in Wymore at that age. I guess there weren't any child labor laws. I have no idea, but I got to work in a dime store. Well, the lady who worked with us and the one who was over us was as strange as she could be. She was married, and her husband worked there too, and as she saw some of the girls standing around waiting to get in the morning at 8 o'clock, we were supposed to get in the dime store, she'd come running way ahead of her husband, who none of us wanted anyway, I'll assure you. She came running way ahead of him, unlocked the door and got us in, and then hid her husband away. We couldn't find him for the rest of the day. If we had needed to ask some questions, we couldn't find him. She was jealous of all of her fellow workers. There were older women there working there, too, besides those of us who were younger girls, and she was terribly jealous of all her fellow workers, and it made for a miserable climate in that dime store. Ben Franklin's store in Wymore, Nebraska. A terrible, terrible experience. Then I started working in restaurants. My dad had a restaurant, and I was a waitress in there, and again, there were times when I just didn't like the way my fellow waitresses waited on tables. They just didn't go fast enough. They spilled things. They didn't know how to give orders. I just didn't like the way they did, and I'm sure they didn't like the way I did either. As I went on away to college, I worked in the dining hall there some, and I can not remember too many experiences. We were so well supervised in that dining hall, and by the way, that helps. When you have a lot of supervision, you don't have very much trouble with your fellow workers because everybody's too busy to have trouble, because the trouble comes when you're sitting around thinking and getting upset about one another. But I went into a restaurant after I got out of college and was married, and I went into a restaurant part-time, and all the waitresses hated this one waitress. They just hated her. They despised her. I can remember that they said that she probably was on drugs. About that time, it was just coming out that people were using drugs the way they were, misusing them the way they were, and she always wore long-sleeved uniforms. So the other waitresses decided that Mary, I believe her name was Mary, it doesn't matter, I believe they decided she was taking drugs. The real problem was that she'd grab tables and out of her station. Perhaps some of you don't know it, but in restaurants, usually each evening you go in and each waitress is given a certain station. And maybe it consists of a couple places at the counter and 5 booths and 3 tables. And some of the tables and booths are always better than others, because the people who really tip well want a particular type of table located in a particular part of the restaurant. And if you're not covered up all night long and stay completely full, it's very, very important who gets what station in a restaurant. And they try to pass it around, and this one always wanted the best station. Not only did she want the best station, but some people would come in that she knew, and she'd run up to the front and get them to ask to be placed in her station, which then she was allowed to have that happen. Why, other waitresses were in tears all the time, and they got together, and behind her back, they said, "Did you see what she did this time?" Day after day after day, they were upset with their fellow worker. In a restaurant, it can be very tremendously miserable. Not only do the waitresses get upset with one another, but waitresses and cooks have notorious fights. Waitresses go back and put in their order, and they don't get it, which makes them have a worse tip, not as good a tip, because they don't get their service to the customer as fast, so they blame the cook. And the cook says, "You didn't put it up here right. I didn't even know I didn't even know your check was up here. Guest check was up here. I didn't see it. And besides, if I had seen it, you can't read this. What does this mean?" And then the waitress says, "You know what it means, and I always put it that way. That's the way you told me to put it." Oh, you can really get into a real mess. And then she says, "This isn't the way I told. Look, it says right here." And she can put her guest check up in his face over the counter that's between them. Thank the Lord there's a counter between them. And she puts the guest check up and says, "Now, who couldn't read that? If you can't read that, I don't know how I could make it any plainer. It said right there what to put on it. Look what you gave me. My customer doesn't want this." And honestly, it's a wonder that chefs don't take meat cleavers after the waitresses. If you've been around, if you know the fights that happen among fellow workers. You say, "Well, that's in a truck garden. That's in a dime store. That's in a restaurant." Then I became what they call a professional. Now, that's a laugh, because teachers can be professional or they can be very unprofessional, just as waitresses can be very professional and businesslike, or they can be unprofessional. Many teachers are not professionals, but supposedly they are professionals. And teachers can become so aggravated with one another. You work in a school for a little while and use the same restrooms, the same lunchrooms, the same playgrounds, and try to schedule with a tight school, a building full of kids, try to schedule when you take your class and then get all mixed up, forget and go over a little bit, and you get there right on top of another teacher, or you're in the restroom when you're not supposed to be, and she has her class down there, and teachers can have all-out wars before their students. It's pitiful. It's ridiculous, but it happens. It's a part of our life. In doctors' offices, the nurses, they don't want that one wants to do the other one's job, or neither one wants to do any job, or some patient comes in they don't like to deal with, and they try to shift it off on the other one and take a break really fast. I don't care what level we're talking about. I don't care. Doctors, nurses. They say the politics in some of the hospitals and what goes on in personnel and in human relations is so difficult that by the time the nurses get in to take care of the poor patients, they're so upset and so aggravated that they can't get along with the patients. I think what I'm describing is realistic. I believe most of you have had your problems, if you'll think back way since your first job, or even when you were a little kid and went out and sold something together with another child, and where you got upset with one another because you didn't have good understandings with your fellow worker. I've told the story before. I decided I was going to have a circus to benefit the Second World War. Went downtown to the stores in Wymore and asked them for all the things that they couldn't sell. My dad would have killed me if he had known, believe me. I went to all those businessmen and I said, do you have things you just can't sell? And I'm going to have a circus, and I'm going to take the money and buy war stamps so that America can win the war. Well, they brought out old yellowed embroidery pieces, and that's not much with which to have a circus, you know. We didn't have animals. We didn't have rides. We didn't have much of anything. We were high on embroidery pieces and low on what really would be considered a circus. But nevertheless, we had our circus. Dad told me not to let Doris Ritchie help me with my circus, but I made the mistake of letting Doris Ritchie help me with my circus. Now, we had explained. Everybody knew why we're having this. I had told the merchants of Limeware why we were having this circus. But Doris Ritchie, after we divided up our profits, and you believe you me, it's difficult to sell yellowed embroidery pieces to 8-year-olds. But after we had divided up our money, and it was $1 something apiece for those of us who worked in it, and started getting on our bicycles to go to the post office and buy our saving stamps, she decided she wasn't going to put her money into saving stamps. My name was, at stake. I had told the people that we was going to go toward the war effort. I just about had a fit. I was in trouble with a fellow worker. There I was, I don't know, 8, 9, 10, I don't know how old I was. You remember... maybe it wasn't work on a job, but as a child, you were in trouble with people with whom you were trying to learn how to work. Brothers and sisters working together, those are fellow workers. You're in trouble. How can you communicate with fellow workers so this does not have to happen, so that you can go to your job, go to your place of employment happily in the morning? It's terrible if you get up dreading your work all day long because of someone you have to face. It's a terrible thing if you have to go relieve yourself of your breakfast because you're so upset every day about going to your work. It's something that God would not be pleased with. I don't believe it has to happen, and I believe we can find some ways out. I know you cannot control what every other person is and does, but you can control yourself. And if you can control yourself, you will find ways in which you can get along with your fellow workers. Psalm 39:3 says, "My heart was hot within me." By the way, this is one of my favorite verses. Dr. Bob Sr. used to tell it to us at Bob Jones University. "While I was musing, the fire burned. Then spake I with my tongue. My heart was hot in me." Have you heard me say, you start thinking, and you start burning. It can be toward good or toward bad. You start thinking and you get all up. Let's say it's bad, because we're talking now about the bad things that can happen with our fellow workers. And so many people say to me, "How should I get along with so-and-so that just keeps me upset in the office? She's always doing something that's just a dig at me, or she tries to take over." One thing the Bible says is, if your heart is hot within you, then you're going to start musing, thinking it over, saying, "She did try to take over, and I just hate the way she acts toward me, and she's always butting in, and this is the kind of person," and pretty soon the fire's burning, and it gets higher and higher and higher. The flames go sky high. "Then spake you with your tongue. Then I spake with my tongue." You can't help it that when someone does something to you that seems like a slight to you, you can't help it that it registers in your mind. But you can help that you sit there and think it through, and go back and think of everything that she's ever done earlier in your life that's bothered you, or last week, or last year, or things that people did when you were a child that were just like what this worker's doing to you now. You can stop that. You can stop it by thinking of this person's problems and realizing she probably does have problems. And you can communicate with her in a lot better way than speaking with your tongue after the fire's been musing in a bad way. You can decide, as Psalm 118:8 says, that it is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man. I heard our preacher say just recently on the radio, someone said, "Doesn't it make you lose confidence in people when someone does something?" And he said, "Why, no. I never had any confidence in the flesh in the first place. I love people, and I am happy for all that they do good, but our confidence is not in man in the first place. Trust in the Lord, and then you're not putting confidence in man. Therefore, you're not disappointed in your fellow worker." Romans 12:18 says, "If it be possible," this always, it makes me laugh a little bit, because sometimes you think, is it possible to get along with all of your fellow workers? "If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men." I know what it is to start a project, and I have a goal, and I want to go toward it, and it overlaps what I'm doing, overlaps my department with other person's department, and they have their goal, and I have mine, and they're not the same goal. And therefore, you say, well, you're in the same school, and you have the same Lord, and you're for the same students. All this is true. But you see, I have a goal that sees a particular thing, this particular goal I want to reach, as being the thing that's going to help the Lord and the students the most. Whereas someone else has another type goal that he feels or she feels will benefit the Lord and God's students best. And sometimes there's not enough time spent communicating with each other for us to realize what the other person's thinking, and we begin to think that we're working against each other. Instead of saying, if it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Decide right away, when it seems like you're at loggerheads with someone, when it seems like someone's out to get you, say, no, they're not. Remember when they did this for me last year? Remember last week? No, they may be tired, they may be upset. Constantly be excusing your fellow worker. Constantly be figuring there's something you don't know that could be causing your fellow worker trouble. If they act a certain way, start to think, what could it be? I wonder if it could be this or that. And by the time you're through thinking that way, your heart's no longer burning against the person with whom you should be communicating. If we're working together with, especially those of us who are Christians, working with fellow Christians, people of the world, when they come in to work with a Christian organization in a church office, bus division, they can't believe that Christians don't always just completely get along. No, we don't. But when we do disagree, we should be able to sit down and communicate, because we have the Bible to show us how to do it. Romans 14:7 says, "For none of us liveth to himself, and no man dieth to himself." Galatians 6:2, "Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ." And I suppose my favorite, because I've known it since I was a little kid, I've known it as far as being able to memorize it, I've not practiced it. "And be ye kind." Don't you want to just say it a certain way? You don't just want to say, "and be ye kind," one to another. "And be ye kind." I know kind people. There are some people I know who are characterized by kindness. We've just had one of them at our school, Dr. and Mrs. John R. Rice. The couple, both of them are kind, but Mrs. Rice has been in my classes, and I've been with her many hours just this week, and she's kind. And the way her eyes talk about people, even people that have hurt her, things that have come up in her life that have hurt her, and she's not, and I happen to know it. But when she talks about them, she says they're a fine that person's a fine person. And you can tell right through her eyes and the tone of her voice that she really means it. I asked her, I said, "Mrs. Rice, how can you feel this way?" I happen to know the hurt that's come to her through a certain person. I said, "How can you say this person is I think she said the person was a beautiful person, a really fine person." I said, "How can you say that?" And she said, oh, it was so simple to her. She said, he didn't have the training when he was a child. He didn't have the discipline in his life or the character. He wants to do these things. He wants to be good. But there were some things, and she told the extenuating circumstances that kept him from being able to have the discipline that would cause him to be able to fulfill promises he makes. And so she could be kind toward him. You say, well, how? If we excuse everybody, they'll just get by with everything. No, they won't get by with it. No one gets by with a thing. For instance, this person she was talking about will hurt all the rest of his life because of the fact that he didn't get the training and discipline that he should have gotten as a child. But she is not, Mrs. Rice is not in a position to help him or teach him. So therefore, why should she feel bad toward him, she's saying. "Be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another even as God, for Christ's sake, has forgiven you." Take that verse to work with you. Now, don't put it up so everyone can see it, so they can see that you're having to quick memorize a verse or go over a verse so you can get along with them. Don't let people know, you're difficult to get along with, but I'm getting the victory over you. just you yourself, put it down someplace. Type it out. Maybe it'll be another verse I give, but this one's so special to me. Type it out. Put it down in your desk drawer. And when you get all upset and feel you've been slighted, feel you've been talked about, laughed about, or someone's put work on you and expected to do it, now maybe you won't do the work. Perhaps you'll go back and say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to do this now. But you'll be tempered in how you say it to the person. Instead of slamming the work down and saying, what do you mean putting that on my desk? I don't have any more time you have. Instead, you'll be saying, I'm sorry, I can't do it now. After you say over and over, and be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, hath forgiven you. What's God forgiven you for Christ's sake? What are some of the things he's forgiven you? Then surely you can forgive any fellow worker anything he has done to you. If you're asking right now, and before you listen to this tape, you were saying, I just cannot work with this person any longer. Stop and think, really? A nurse called me one night. And she said, I'm at the doctor's office where I work. I'm at the clinic. There were several doctors in that clinic. She said, I'm assigned to Dr. So-and-so. She said, I cannot work with him another minute. I'm calling you because I'm going to say something wrong. I've got to get out of here. I have to talk to somebody. He curses. He doesn't even want he doesn't want you to use an extra Band-Aid. And at that time, I think she said, she might have been exaggerating, but she said, I think they cost a half a cent a piece when we get them wholesale as we do. And he gets all exercised if we use an extra Band-Aid. And he says things to me. I said, tell me about him. What's he like? She said, oh, he's a woman chaser. He's started on in that vein again. He's been married 4 or 5 times. I said, oh, he must be miserable. She said, yeah. I said, he can't keep a relationship with anybody. Well, no. And she did know a little bit about him. And she went ahead to tell me some other things about him. And as she got through, she wasn't quite as strident, quite as huffy as she was when she was huffing and puffing and calling and saying, I can't work with this doctor anymore. Now, I'm not sure that she should have continued working with him, with his cursing and some of his off-colored stories, but she didn't need to stride out of there in a fit of temper that night. And she did need to be tempered in how she talked with him. And it was very possible as she began to be tempered that she would be able to talk with him in such a way that he wouldn't want to talk with her in a risque way. There are many, many people who curse and talk in a risque manner who won't do it around certain people because not because you tell them not to and are all angry and upset, but just because of your kind manner and just because of your loving heart and the way you react to things, the way the person reacts to things. I believe you can control a lot of the fellow worker problem. Now, I realize it's there. I admit it. It's realistic to say it is there. But other than saying it's there, I know there are a lot of things that we can do about it. Some fellow workers never will be a real joy to you. But you know, it'll be a joyful thing for you to work with them just knowing that you have gained victory through Christ to the point that you care about them, to the point that you don't feel hateful and bitter toward them. Now, how can you? I've given you some ways to communicate with fellow workers, as I've just said. Get to know them, know about their background, in your own mind excuse them, not for things they do, not to them. And if you can help them get over it, whatever the behavior is that's bad, go ahead and do so. But constantly, for your own sake, for your own peace of mind, constantly excuse folks and give them the benefit of the doubt. My husband constantly says, there are 110 workers, I guess, at Hyles-Anderson College, staff and faculty. He constantly says to all of us in staff and faculty meeting, give the other person the benefit of the doubt. Give the other person the benefit of the doubt. Say it over and over and over to yourself. We can be a joy to our fellow workers, though, now and communicate with them by being interested in their families. Some unsaved workers that you have to work around sometimes, they can't believe it, that when you come through as you do as a Christian, when they have sickness or death in their family, communicate with them. Now, don't go overboard and think you can buy them, because you can't buy people. But it surely doesn't hurt to send a card of congratulations to a fellow worker's a graduate, someone who's just graduating from high school. Goes a long way. And really care. Really care about the person. As you send the card, pray for them. And perhaps you and the worker aren't doing that well. But you and the worker's child could strike up and have something going for you. Help each other when you're in trouble. Decide you're going to help people whether they help you or not. If you can get your work done and they're in trouble, you can tell they're sick, you can tell they're down. Now, some of them don't want that you go over and offer your help. And you say, yeah, I'll offer help to them, and they'll say, get out of here. But, find a way that you could do something that might lift them a little bit. It might be that you can't do any of their work for them because they might feel threatened. That might be the very fact why they're so mean to you. They feel threatened by everybody, insecure and therefore threatened. All right, but I wonder if they'd care if you just put a cup of orange juice down in front of them, said, I got and say something offhand like, I got an extra one when I went out. Maybe you'll like it. If not, just give it to somebody else. Sometimes you have to do it in an offhand manner that way because people can't accept a gift. And that's just too much of a gift. They don't know how to say thank you. But in some way, find a way to communicate that way. And like I say, it might not be that you can say, I went and bought this for you. I hope you like it. You might have to almost throw them something and say, here it is. If you want it, okay. If not, give it away. That's learning to communicate on the basis of how they can handle it, your fellow workers. Go by and give them a word of encouragement. I've mentioned Mrs. Stevens several times. It just happened that today she came by my office, knocked on the door, and said, God told me to come over and tell you something. And she said, and she started to tell me something she felt I had done for her a few years ago. And she said, it just came all over me again today. And God told me to come tell you. I don't know whether you need it or not, but I just had to come and tell you. And some tears were in her eyes. Oh, boy. Communication with fellow workers. What communication? How you can go ahead and work with one another. And when the hard times come and you don't understand each other and you think one another's getting at you, if you've done some of these little things like giving words of encouragement, throwing a cup of orange juice on a desk, sent a congratulation card to a member of the family, called when someone was sick, and not said a thing to your fellow worker, but just call and let them know. Or maybe your fellow workers has a special interest, and you see an article in the newspaper or a magazine, and you cut it out and give it to them. And they know you're thinking of them because you've done something like that. There's a million ways to communicate. Whether you love your fellow worker, whether you like your fellow worker, whether you have a difficult time not hating your fellow worker, or in whatever status you are. I do know this. Look not every man on his own things, but every man also on the things of others. Philippians 2:4. Care about those people with whom you work. Show them that you have Jesus in you, and that you're not going to preach to them all the time. Some of you are working with unsaved people or backslidden people or Christians who sometimes act backslidden. Show them Jesus. Remind them of Jesus again if they do know him. Show them Jesus if they don't know him. By you yourself being in such close touch with the Lord and being in the Word of God and going over these verses that I've given in this tape to the point that you can smile and love people and encourage them whether they do that back to you or not. It'll pay. Not always in the way you expect it to, but it'll pay.